Peach Blossom Det. Chapter 21. When evening came around, I arrived at Ziweo Pavilion once more. Except this time, I did not head for King Xian's room. I had made a written pact with the procuress yesterday. Seeing as that squire's nephew still had yet to discuss King Xian's price with the procuress, I had beaten him to the punch, telling her that I wanted to redeem King Xian's freedom. The procuress had put on a show of hesitating, loath to part with her top earner, and thrown out an exorbitant price. I cooperated by playing the role of a cuckold liberal with his money and gave a candid, ready nod of my head. The procuress was thrilled. I set the banknotes before her, earning a beam even more radiant than the flowers in spring. "Thank you, my lord. From today onward, Qing Xian is all yours." The ladies from Ziweo Pavilion crowded around Qing Xian as she walked out. With tears glistening in her eyes, she curtsied deeply to me. At least it could be said that this immortal lord had done a good deed during these few days in the mortal world. The procuress even went to the special effort of sending a small, pink sedan to send Qing Xian off. And so it was in full view of the common folks of this city that this immortal lord led King Xian's tiny sedan to my humble compound under the darkness of the night. Qing Xian dismounted the sedan and entered the courtyard at the side of this immortal lord. In the courtyard, the maidservants, young servant, and cook all stood still like wooden stakes, and the copper basin in the young servant's hands hit the ground with a noisy clatter. Qing Xian stood beside me, looking like a crabapple blossom adorned with dewdrops as she timidly lowered her head. I saw Hengwen and Tianqiu walk from the doors of the main hall to the covered walkway, where they repeatedly sized the pair of us up. I said to the crowd, "Miss Qing Xian will be temporarily living in the courtyard, so please tidy up a guest room." The maidservants, young servant, and cook were all very quick-witted. The young servant picked up the copper basin and immediately answered, Sure, this humble one will go right away." One of the maidservants came to support Qing Xian by the arm. "Miss, please take a rest first in the hall." The other maidservant said to Hengwen and Tianqiu, "It's getting late. Young masters, let this lowly one attend to the two of you while you rest." Hengwen and Tianqiu then returned to their rooms with her. The maidservant helped Qing Xian into the small hall, served tea of which Qing Xian sipped a cup and announced that the hot water was ready, escorting her to the bath. I instructed the maidservants to serve her well, then strolled over to the side chambers. After a moment's hesitation, I pushed open the door to Tianqiu's chamber. Tianqiu was reading a book under the light, but seeing me enter, he set it down. "Not going to bed yet? You should rest early," I said. Tianqiu uttered an acknowledgement and asked, "That Qing Xian? She was being forced into marriage by a wealthy family," I explained. "I took pity on her and redeemed her freedom before they could. Tomorrow, I'll ask her if she still has any relatives she can rely on. In all likelihood, we will have to return to the heavenly court in the next few days, so settling her down before returning would be considered a meritorious deed during my trip to the mortal world." Tianqiu nodded his head, albeit with a puzzled expression, then closed his book and obediently went to bed. I went to Hengwen's room next. Hengwen was sitting on the bed unwrapping Furble's bandage. I moved in for a look. These few days, I had been using my powers to treat its wounds. Hengwen had cast a tiny spell too, and now Furble was completely healed. All that remained were bald spots where the fur had yet to grow back. "It's getting more and more spirited these days," I commented. "Yes," Hengwen responded with a smile. "Its injuries have healed." He reached out to stroke the fox's back, and the fox smacked its lips and licked Hengwen's other hand. I moved Furble aside and took his place on the edge of the bed. "It's getting late. Sleep early." Hengwen yawned. "Now that you mention it, I'm really a little sleepy." All I had to say was, "Then sleep. I'll take my leave." Hengwen smiled. "All right." I left Hengwen's room and pushed open the door to my own. Wearing a sheer gown as flimsy as the wings of cicadas, Qing Xian sat under the lamp, looking at me with eyes that were bashful, sultry, and enamored all at once. I gave a genteel smile as I stood outside the door. Please take a good rest first, Miss Qingxian. If there's anything you feel unaccustomed to, feel free to let me know tomorrow. I turned to leave when Qingxian said quietly behind me, Young master, since you have already redeemed me, I'm yours from today onward. Or do you disdain me for being an unchaste woman past her prime, unworthy of such a virtuous gentleman? I had no choice but to turn back to her. How can you say that, Miss Qingxian? I was merely lending a helping hand by redeeming your freedom, the act in itself is nothing worthy of mention. There's no need for you to beholden yourself to me. You can stay in my humble abode for a couple of days. If you still have any kin or sweetheart whom you can rely on, don't hesitate to tell me. I'll make the arrangements for you. Not a single thought seemed to cross Qingxian's face, but soon enough, she had covered it with a sob. In saying this, are you turning me away? Young master, do you know that when you passed by the building that day, I was taken with your graceful charm? That was why I so boldly used my handkerchief to play matchmaker, hoping to get to know you. I was so delighted when you redeemed my freedom, thinking that heaven had finally opened its eyes to my plight and Buddha had finally blessed me. But who knew, that young master, you, would say such words to me? I heaved a long sigh. Miss Qingxian, it's not like you don't know that my heart is already spoken for, but I'm doomed to a fate of eternal solitude, with no hope ever of marriage. Wipe your tears and sleep well. I'll figure a way out for you again tomorrow. I closed the door behind me before I walked to the yard. Once more, I had nowhere to sleep, and sitting on the roof tiles was chilly, the night breeze growing increasingly colder. I remembered there was another hard couch in the study, so I snuck in and recited a spell to transform it into a large, soft bed. Bolting the door, I turned in. I had indeed invited a thorny trouble upon myself by bringing Qingxian back. I had 2 tagalongs in tow, and yet she had still fallen for me at first sight. Apparently, there was no burying this immortal lord's charm. I closed my eyes, and was about to fall asleep when a plaintive tune rang out from afar. It drifted past the crack of the door and burrowed its way into my ears. Seeing that Qingxian had hit a roadblock with this immortal lord earlier, she had taken out her bamboo flute to play a tune or two to distract herself. The song was mournful and heart-wrenching, I fell asleep to it. The next day, all the servants in the courtyard looked listless, their eyes glazed over as they yawned repeatedly. I pretended not to have noticed a thing. Qingxian, meanwhile, had shut herself in her room, and I paid her no mind. Hengwen and Tianjia could not refrain from letting loose a couple of yawns themselves over breakfast. To me, Tianjia said, that one from yesterday. You can call her Miss Qingxian, I said with a cough. All right, Tianjia acquiesced. Why isn't Miss Qingxian coming for breakfast? She probably hasn't gotten up yet, I hazarded. I'll get someone to deliver breakfast to her later. Tianjia nodded, and the maidservant serving the dishes lowered her head, hiding a smile behind her sleeve. In the afternoon, the cook looked at me and said, Master, it's not our prerogative to speak out of turn when it comes to your affairs, but isn't it a little inappropriate to get the 2 young masters to call the Madam Miss Qingxian? After all, there is hierarchy to consider here. Even if she's only the master's bed warmer, it's still. I wanted to explain the situation at first, but the affairs between men and women were hard to explain, much less in clear-cut terms. So I simply said, Miss Qingxian is merely staying here for a day or 2. All of you should also address her as Miss Qingxian. Just treat her courteously and according to the protocols for a guest. The cook stole a glance at me, acknowledged my instruction, and left. I went to Qingxian's room and asked if she still had any kin she could turn to. Qingxian bit her lips and kept her head lowered without saying a word. After a long time, she said, Young master, I'm aware that you want to marry young Miss Feng. My presence here will only make it awkward. I'm already yours, so I have no complaints whether you send me off to the countryside or resell me to another. I spoke to her for a long length of time without further progress, so I could only leave. Qingxian took out her qin again and sat in her room, playing and singing several forlorn tunes. She sang until the cook, maidservants, and young servant all fled far away to the backyard, while Heng Wen and Tianxi's playmates came for less than a quarter of an hour before they scattered. I looked on helplessly as a very bored Heng Wen carried the fox out from his chamber. The fox sneezed, and its ears trembled. With eyes tightly shut, it burrowed its head deep into Heng Wen's bosom. It all looked very unbecoming to me. The fox was still a demon, after all. It was improper for it to keep sticking to Heng Wen, even if Heng Wen appeared to be an adolescent. I said to Heng Wen, if nothing else, put it aside and let it sleep. Isn't it a tad heavy to keep hugging it all the time? Then I'll take it back to the room, Heng Wen said, and turned back inside. As I lingered under the eaves of the roof, the cook and young servant intercepted me. The young servant bowed and grimaced at me. Master, aren't you going to comfort Miss Qingxian? I said to let her have a quiet moment for the time being and strolled onward. The cook hurriedly strode a step forward and bowed. Master, please don't hold it against us servants for speaking out of turn. Ever since last night, Miss Qingxian's tunes have evoked such heartache in us. Master, you should go and comfort her. I sighed in despondency. I have, in fact, come back from comforting her in the late morning, but it was futile. Since she wants to play, then just let her play. The cook and the young servant then left, looking rather distressed. Qingxian took a break during lunchtime, but in the afternoon, when Madame Liu came calling again, she was greeted by Qingxian's sorrowful tune. After she sat down and exchanged some pleasantries, she got to the point. Young master's song, this old one is merely here to pass a message. I hope you don't mind. About the matter this old one spoke to you about the last time I asked that you please just pretend that I have never mentioned it. I promptly understood that this was because of Qingxian. It was just as well for me, so I said, thank you for passing on the message. May I trouble you to convey another message to them? This humble one understands. It's indeed regrettable, and I'll definitely not bring this up again. But Madame Liu changed her tune and said, actually, it's not that this old one is speaking out of turn, but you pulled such a stunt just when a marriage was about to be realized. The Fengs find it all very humiliating. They feared that a distinguished person like you did not think much of the young miss of their household, making it seem like they were the ones who had tried to force their young miss onto you. If you send away this courtesan from the brothel, it would not be impossible to turn things around. I could not be bothered to expend more energy on this matter, so I gave a perfunctory answer, it is as you say. This humble one will definitely consider your advice carefully. Let's talk about it again in a few days. Which, at any rate, successfully fobbed off Madame Liu. I was just about to return to my room for a drink of water, but Qingxian was waiting at my door, asking to see me. On entering my room, her first words were, I heard Madame Liu come over in the afternoon. It seems she's here to talk about your marriage. Young master, there's no need to take me into consideration. If you wish to send me away, then. I sighed. Covering her mouth with her handkerchief, Qingxian sobbed, but I only love and admire you. Young master. Just one day, or even one night, let Qingxian serve you once. However you want to deal with me afterward, I took her in, thinking that she was merely one love-struck woman in this wide world. I never expected that I would have someone be so besotted with me before I was sent to the immortal execution terrace. Even that bit about my fate of eternal solitude was disproved. I had indeed gained plenty. I reached out to help her up. In a gentle voice, I said, I'm not marrying young Miss Feng. As for you, I'll definitely make the proper arrangements too. Get up first and return to your room. Qingxian wiped her tears, rose to her feet and curtsied, then did as I asked. I was exhausted, having been tormented in turns like a pinwheel. I could not even stop myself from yawning during dinner. Initially, I hoped that meant I could get a good night's sleep at night. Then during the second night watch period, a tune started to waft through the air and linger, sounding like the forlorn cries of the cuckoo and the mournful wails of a widow at her husband's grave. There was even a quiver trailing each note, so much that even I quavered along with it. But as I pricked up my ears to listen, it occurred to me that this sound did not originate from Qingxian's room, but from the backyard. So I rolled over and lifted my concealed form from my physical body, floating out of the study to investigate. However, the sound of the flute came to an abrupt stop. Under the veil of darkness, a shadowy figure streaked across the moon gate in the backyard. I followed it into the backyard, only to see a figure leap off the courtyard wall. Under the starlight by the flower clusters, this figure traded gazes with the silhouette of another person here. The other person had a delicate and lithe figure Qingxian. As for the other one who had leaped off the courtyard wall, I supposed he was the fellow who had played the flute. Somehow, however, this visitor's form seemed familiar. I stood beside them. The flute player was grasping Qingxian's hands as he said in an urgent voice, "Qingxian, leave with me. Let's elope somewhere far away." "Leave?" Qingxian said wistfully. "Where can we go? Why are you here for me again?" The flute player had only just said a word when a voice suddenly interrupted from the top of the wall. "That's right, Qingxian, where are you going to take her?" The flute player and Qingxian both gave a start and whipped their heads up. A figure standing atop the courtyard wall leaped lightly off the wall, walked over to the flute player, and asked again. "Qingxian, where are you going to take her?" That person was dressed in men's attire, but had a sweet, delicate voice and a slender, graceful figure. It was a young girl. All of a sudden, the script for the meeting between the butterfly lovers turned into two damsels meet a hero. I stood to the side again and watched as the flustered flute player stammered, "Young Miss Yu Ying, why are you?" "Qingxian, you should leave now," Qingxian said softly. "Young Miss Yu Ying, don't worry. Qingxian will never come looking for me again. Young Master Song has already bought me, and he said himself that he would not propose marriage to your parents. Young Miss Yu Ying, you can marry Qingxian with peace of mind. Young Master Song redeemed me from a courtesan's life, so I will repay him for all my life. Qingxian, I wish you and young Miss Yu Ying a lifetime of conjugal bliss." She turned to leave. The flute player grabbed her sleeve, stopping her. "Qingxian, did you deceive that song man into redeeming you just to bring young Miss Yu Ying and me together? How can you be so foolish? All this time, my heart only has Qingxian." Young Miss Yu Ying cut him off coldly and took another step toward the flute player. Well, Qingxian, you finally speak the truth today." With a bitter laugh, she continued, "That's right. I should have known that you only have eyes for Qingxian. I should have known the moment you cast aside your dignity as a scholar who'd passed the county imperial examinations to sell rouge at the foot of the brothel. It was just that when we were children, you said you would marry me as your bride, and like a fool, I took it seriously, unwilling to believe that you would end up falling for someone else." She threw an object onto the ground and turned back toward the wall. So it turned out that the flute player was the young lad selling rouge on the ground floor of Ziwiho Pavilion. No wonder I found the sight of him familiar. Yu Ying walked up to the wall, then turned around and continued, "Miss Qingxian, for Jingxuan's sake, you even used yourself to hold back that song person, so that he could not propose marriage to my parents. You really are foolish. When my parents forced me to marry him, I told them I'd rather die. If they force me into a corner, at most I'll just leave and end this once and for all. You never asked Qingxian who he liked, and went straight to sacrificing yourself. Didn't you know how it would hurt him?" This immortal lord realized that this courtyard wall of mine was indeed really low. It did not take young Miss Feng Yuying much effort at all to climb her way up and jump away. Meanwhile, Qing Xian and He Jingxian were still gazing at each other. Qing Xian, He Jingxian pleaded, leave with me. Qing Xian shook her head. It's too late. I've deceived young Master Song. He has money, so he must have power and influence too. If I leave with you, I will only put you in harm's way. Xian Lang, leave without me. I floated over to the moon gate, manifested myself, and coughed. He Jingxian was right in the midst of tightly grasping King Xian's hands. When this pair of star-crossed lovebirds heard my cough, they immediately began trembling like falling leaves in the wind. Don't be afraid, I said with an affable smile. I've seen it all from where I was in the shadows earlier. I fished out a piece of paper from my sleeve and tore it into pieces. 2. Qing Xian, I said, that was your indenture. Qing Xian looked steadily at me and suddenly fell to her knees with He Jingxian. The love between both of you is so earth-shakingly touching that even a layman like me is deeply moved, I said in all sincerity. I may not be a virtuous gentleman, but I'm willing to grant you your wish to be together. He Jingxian, take Miss Jingxian away. In the middle of the night, when the wind was cold, I stood in the open and spacious backyard and let out a laugh. So this was this immortal lord's fate after all. I thought I had picked up 2 romances before being sent to the immortal execution terrace, but it turned out I was still a go-between for other couples. Behind me, a voice said at leisure, so, how does your recent spate of romantic luck with the ladies feel? End chapter. Peach Blossom Det. Chapter 22. I looked back and saw him standing close by. He smiled at me. It felt as if my heart was lifted, and for a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I could not control my legs as I hurried over to him. Even my voice trembled when I spoke. He simply stood there, smiling as he listened. Hung Heng Wen. I grabbed hold of his sleeve. I had been longing for this for so long, and now that it was right before my eyes, I suspected it to be all a dream. He moved in closer to me and whispered into my ears, actually, that night when you told me to recover soon, I somehow really did. But then I saw you basking in the love of those peach blossom women, so I wanted to see how your luck would play out this time. He feigned a sigh. Looks like there's something to what you've been moping about all this time. Your luck in love truly leaves much to be desired. I just looked at him, at a loss for words. It's late, and the wind is cold, Heng Wen said. It wouldn't be good if someone saw us standing in the yard like this. Let's return to the chamber first. Embarrassed, I released his sleeve. All right. As we re-entered the covered walkway, Heng Wen chuckled. You've been sleeping in the study these 2 days. Can I enter, though? I let out an awkward laugh and pushed the door to the study open. The room was tiny. I had had someone replace the hard couch with a large bed, leaving only a small gap of free space on all sides. The moonlight just so happened to shine on the table the moment I opened the door. I closed it behind us, and Heng Wen erected a magical barrier around us with a wave of his sleeve. You've just recovered, I said, so best not to use your divine powers for now. What if? It's fine, Heng Wen said. Didn't I already use them these past few days? I could not help myself, reaching out again to grasp his sleeve. Still, it's better to use less of it. You. Heng Wen stood looking at me. He had already recovered. These few days in the mortal world had finally come to an end. No matter which, there would eventually come a day when it all ended. I grasped Heng Wen by both arms and called him by his name. Before he could react, I kissed him on the lips. This immortal lord really did admire myself so. How wise was I, to have had someone carry in a large bed this morning. The peach blossom wood had been an illusion, conjured by Heng Wen's divine powers. It had always been unreal, dreamlike, and nothing like the vivid realism I was living. Now, The tips of Heng Wen's brows had furrowed into a frown. I'm gentler than I was last time, I whispered into his ear, voice hoarse. Heng Wen opened partially closed eyes, and when he looked at me, there seemed to be a smile in them. Then he bit my neck, hard. Have at it to your heart's content. Next, next time, I won't let you get your way. As the harshness of winter neared, drawing well water and warming it in the tub became a more taxing task. The original intention was to wash Heng Wen and myself clean, but in the end, we washed until we ended up in bed. So, we changed the water again, heated it up again, and washed up again. Rinse and repeat. By the time this immortal lord was all refreshed and content and taking a nap for real with Heng Wen in my arms, it was almost dawn. No wonder the mortals love to lament over the brevity of conjugal nights, Heng Wen remarked lazily. Only tonight do I understand. Then he closed his eyes and drifted into a sound sleep. I closed my eyes, more than ready for a short rest, but then I had another dream. In my dream, I was sitting under the lamp in a room, a game of chess laid out before me. The world before my eyes seemed to be shrouded in a veil of fog. I could not see the game clearly, or my opponent for that matter, but I knew viscerally that I had lost. I've lost again, I blurted out. Will I ever get to beat you once this lifetime? The snuff of the candlewick crackled, although the first light of dawn was already sneaking through the window paper. The person opposite me waved a hand to extinguish the lamp. He then pushed open the window panel, the morning rays poured across the room. In the blink of an eye, however, I was standing in a courtyard. It was so foggy I had difficulty seeing, but I seemed to be well acquainted with everything in the courtyard. Ahead of me should be a pond, where the water lilies had just grown round leaves. At the edge of the bank were a few pieces of decorative tehu rocks and 2 plantain trees, as well as a pavilion on the opposite bank. In it sat a stone table with a chessboard carved into it. It should be spring at this time. The fragrance of Lady Bank's roses in the morning mist was mentally refreshing. No doubt the vines of climbing Lady Bank's rose branches on the courtyard walls were in full bloom. He stood right beside me. Behind me was that same window from earlier. Perfect is the spring breeze, when the morning dew thins. I said to him. I still could not see his face clearly, but I knew he was smiling with pleasure. The flowers were fragrant, the morning breeze cool and refreshing. The fog, however, was thickening. I anxiously looked at his face, wanting to know who he was, but his entire figure was concealed in the fog, invisible and indiscernible. I reached out, wanting to grab hold of him to ask, but the moment my fingers grasped the corner of the slightly cool fabric, I jolted awake. I was clutching Heng Wen's sleeve, and Heng Wen was leaning against the headboard, his head tilted aside as he looked at me. I hurriedly propped myself up. You should sleep a little longer. Lie back down. It's not like I'm immortal, Heng Wen said lazily. I'm not that weak. My fatigue's almost gone after a good sleep. This immortal lord immediately followed up with a question, where did you learn that mortals are weak? From the books, Heng Wen yawned. When it comes to that sort of book, those with just illustrations are not as good as those with both illustrations and accompanying text. Heng Wen, just how much erotica had he read? Heng Wen looked down. What's wrong with your left hand? It doesn't seem to be very mobile. I was in the midst of rubbing my little finger. Maybe I hurt it some time ago. It feels a little out of sorts. Since early morning, I had been feeling stabbing pain at the base of my little finger, like it was being sliced by a knife. Heng Wen raised my hand for a look. All of a sudden, he said, I'm going to head back first to the heavenly court. He laughed at my expression. Don't panic. I'm not going back to plead guilty. I just think many reasons for your trip down this time are extremely contrived. There's something fishy about this matter, too. I'm thinking of going to the Jade Emperor to clear up all these doubts. As for the confession of guilt, the tips of his hair brushed gently against my shoulder, we'll go together. I could never stop Heng Wen if he wanted to return to heaven, so I said, "All right, then." Following his lead, I draped my clothes around myself and got out of bed. I smoothed the front flaps of his clothes for him, and as Heng Wen walked to the door, he turned aside and asked, "Song Yao, who do you think would set up love trials for us the way you did for Tianchu and Nanming?" With a dry laugh, I answered, "I haven't really thought about that." Heng Wen smiled, then turned around in the morning rays. With a flick of his sleeves, he transformed into a beam of light to depart. For a moment, I stood blankly in that empty chamber. Then, with a sigh, I reached into my sleeves. I spread a sheet of paper on the table, preparing a brush that I could write with without ink. In the end, I folded up my work a sheet chock full of writing and recited an incantation. That piece of paper instantaneously transformed into golden light, and vanished without a trace. When I had initially descended to the mortal world, the Jade Emperor had bestowed this upon me in secret. It was called a submission memorial. No matter where I was, this memorial could make its way to the Jade Emperor's desk in an instant. I stepped out of the study, rubbing my temples. Heng Wen knew nothing of the ways of the mortal world, thus, he still acted without consideration for the consequences. This morning, the courtyard was missing Qingxian and a little young master. How was this immortal lord going to explain their disappearance to the servants and little Tianchu? No matter how fast Heng Wen was, he would definitely not be as fast as that memorial. In that memorial, I told the Jade Emperor that the offending immortal Song Yao had failed the Jade Emperor's decree by secretly communicating information to Tianchu Xing Jun. On top of that, I had been swayed by secular love. Knowing there was no excuse for this unpardonable sin, I pled guilty of my own accord. With the memorial submitted, this immortal lord's tragedy of a fate was sealed. I would definitely not escape punishment for my intervention in Tianchu's trials, and since I was already going to be sent to the immortal execution terrace, why drag Heng Wen along with me? The precedent of Tianchu and Nanming was right before my eyes. So, I thought, even if I were to be banished to the mortal world again, it was still better for Heng Wen to remain in the heavenly court than for the both of us to be exiled. I made my way to the covered walkway and came face to face with a maidservant, who greeted me with a curtsy. I was wondering if I should buy some time by telling her that Miss Qingxian and the little young master were still asleep and not to be disturbed when the young servant suddenly ran over to me in a fluster. Master, the main hall, in the main hall, you should go and take a look, quickly." This immortal lord strode swiftly to the main hall, where a man and a woman in the center of the hall fell to their knees on seeing me. Why had Qingxian and the flute player returned? They remained on the ground, crying their hearts out to me. With Qingxian's dainty hand in his, the flute player cried, "Young Master Song, you're this Junior and Qing'er's great benefactor. After this Junior and Qing'er are married, we will erect a longevity tablet to honor you in our home and offer incense every day." The pair cried in tandem. But why in the world had these two not let their tears run their course in the backyard yesterday instead of making a special trip here to cry again? Resigned, I bent over and helped them up. I really do not deserve this honor. The unity of a pair of lovers in marriage is the most fulfilling of all in the world. This lowly one is merely acting in accordance with heaven's wishes. After seeing Qingxian and the flute player off, I returned to the main hall to see little Tianchu standing by the screen. Tianchu looked at me with bright, shiny eyes. Why did Qingxian and that man cry like that just now? Is this the love of mortals? I ruffled his hair and took my seat. That's right. Isn't love something that makes mortals happy? Tianchu asked. In that case, they should be smiling. Why did they cry? When you get involved in something like this, there will be plenty of tears and smiles, I said. Tianchu uttered an "oh." I told the maidservants not to call up the little young master yet, on account of him being a sleepyhead today. I would hold them off for as long as it took. After breakfast, Tianchu asked me in a hushed tone, "Where's Heng Wen?" "He went back to the heavenly court first," I answered truthfully. Tianchu creased his forehead in a frown. I was just about to explain in detail when a bright light suddenly lit up the interior of the chamber. Bihu Dijun materialized in midair, leading 5 or 6 heavenly soldiers. In a loud, clear voice, he announced, Song Yao Yuan Jun, I am here on the Jade Emperor's decree to lead you and Tianchu Xing Jun back to the heavenly court post haste. Tianchu had yet to recover. Confused, he reached out to tightly clutch the front of this immortal lord's clothes. Bihu Dijun alighted on the ground and said politely, Song Yao Yuan Jun, this way, please. The 5 or 6 heavenly soldiers moved toward Tianchu, but this immortal took a step to stand before him. Dijun, if you would be so kind as to allow Tianchu Xing Jun to remain by my side for the time being. Bihu Dijun looked at Tianchu. That's fine. With a signal from his eyes, the heavenly soldiers withdrew, and passed through the wall to look around. After a moment, they returned. One of them was carrying the fox in his hands. He said to Bihu, to report to your eminence, we sent those mortals off into their dreams. When they wake up, they will just assume this household has already moved away. Bihu Dijun gave a slight nod of his head. Let's go. The scenery in the heavenly court was the same as ever, as were the rose-tinted clouds and the few faces guarding the southern heavenly gate. He Yun, the Jade Emperor's heavenly envoy, stood before the southern heavenly gate and bowed to Bihu Dijun. This humble immortal has waited here for a long time on the Jade Emperor's decree. Has Dijun brought back the person the Jade Emperor instructed you to retrieve? Little Tianchu stood by my side, while the heavenly soldier holding the fox stood on the other. May I trouble heavenly envoy he to report back to the Jade Emperor that I've brought them back with no issue? Bihu Dijun said. He Yun looked in my direction, and nodded. This humble immortal understands. Then he added, the Jade Emperor has sent instructions that Dijun send Tianchu Xing Jun to Yaoguang Palace. Having received the order, Bihu Dijun turned to Tianchu. Please come with me, he said, though he seemed deeply reluctant to do so. Little Tianchu did not understand what was happening, but he answered in a clear, childlike voice, fine. In that case, I shall have to trouble Dijun. He stepped forward beside me, then turned his head again to ask, oh, right, where do you live in the heavenly court? You've been looking after me these days in the mortal realm. I will call on you again another day to convey my thanks. I forced a smile. I live in the Guangxu Manor. If you are able to come over, you can ask the Northern Heavenly King to show you the way. Tianchu nodded with a smile. Probably because I haven't been out of the Baidu Palace much, I'm ashamed to say that I've not heard of it before. But after descending to the mortal world these few days, the vista in the heavenly court sure has changed some. Farewell for now. Let's go back again when we have free time. Sure, I responded and watched as Tianchu walked over to Bihu Dijun's side. He Yun replaced him, accompanying this immortal lord. Please come with me. I took a step forward, and He Yun reached out a hand to stop me. Song Yao Yuan Jun, this humble immortal wasn't talking about you. The Jade Emperor's verbal instruction was for you to return to your residence, and to rest for now. He looked at the heavenly soldier carrying furball. You, come with me. Now, I was terrified. He Yun was still very courteous when he spoke to me, and he even continued to address me as Song Yao Yuan Jun. Evidently, the Jade Emperor had yet to give the command to strip me of my title and immortal status. This meant that his venerable self had a severe punishment in store for me. This immortal lord watched helplessly as Bihu led Tianchu and He Yun led the heavenly soldier carrying furball further and further into the distance. The remaining heavenly soldiers bowed to me and said, Yuan Jun, we have been ordered to escort you back to your residence. When I looked up, Tianchu's tiny figure had already dissolved into the clouds and mist. Why didn't the Jade Emperor have me hauled to his palace for interrogation? What exactly was his venerable self up to? And Heng Wen, how was he now? Surrounded by the various heavenly soldiers, I returned to my Guangxu Yuan Jun's residence. Come to think of it, I had been in the heavenly court for so many years, fumbling for this title of Yuan Jun, without many attendants to show for it. I had been rather envious at the sight of so many escorting Dijun and Hengwen during the morning sessions. Today, sandwiched in the midst of my own escort of heavenly soldiers, it was this immortal lord who came in with pomp and panache for once. For the first time, I seriously eyed my Guangxu Yuan Jun's residence from afar and suddenly found it to be quite imposing with its plastered walls, ink-black tiles, and bright, red-colored main gate. No wonder Hengwen had always loved to wander here, claiming my Yuan Jun's residence to be much more comfortable than his Wei Yuan palace. How regrettable that in all these years, I had not treated it with the care it deserved. When I walked over to the main gate, I felt even more terrified. The words, Guangxu Yuan Jun's residence, were still sparkling on the plaque at the top. I sighed in dismay. Looked like his venerable self, the Jade Emperor was furious. He intended to strip me of my title, tear down my plaque, confiscate my manor, strike off my immortal status, and whatever else to add some variety to my punishment. It was going to be a severe one, merely temporarily deferred. One of the heavenly soldiers opened the main gate and shoved me inside before shutting it. I heard the clattering sound of chains being rapped, and then the click of a lock before it clanged against the doors. From the sound of it, this lock was not at all small. A sturdy, divine dome overhead covered my residence, like a large inverted bowl, detaining me securely in Guangxu Manor. For the first time, I also realized just how big my Guangxu Yuan Jun's residence was. I strolled to and fro in the various chambers. The residence was empty, and I was its only presence. The stone bed in the backyard where Hengwen and I had slept together after we got drunk the first time he visited me. The remnants of the unfinished game of chess was still scattered on the chessboard beneath the magnolia tree. The 2 jars of fine wine hidden in the corner of the chamber in the left wing, the ones that he had yet to fleece off me. The brush on the study table was still the same one Hengwen had offhandedly picked up the last time Lu Jing had hunted him down for an important correspondence. The lotus ink painting hanging on the wall of my bedchamber that he had gifted me the first time he came around. The glazed screen made with black jade that Hengwen had won in a battle of divine skills with Donghua Dijun, still displayed in the hall. I had unabashedly asked for it after telling him it was at odds with the furnishings in his Wei Yuan palace. The pillars on the covered walkway were still decorated with the phrases he had offhandedly written during our conversation about matching couplets. Before we descended to the mortal world, I had sparred with him in the courtyard, and in a moment of inattention, blown up a railing of the wayside pavilion. To date, it still had yet to be repaired. As I moved from the chamber to the backyard, a voice sounded from beyond the divine barrier overhead, Song Yao Yuan Jun, the Jade Emperor has ordered this humble immortal to bring you to the Peach of Immortality Garden for an audience with him. For the life of me, I could not figure out why the Jade Emperor had to bring this immortal lord to trial in the Peach of Immortality Garden and not Ling Xiao Palace. Of course, if the Jade Emperor's intent was so easily guessed by the likes of me, his venerable self would not be the Jade Emperor. Resigned, I looked up. He Yun, am I supposed to bring my residence with me to meet the Jade Emperor if you don't open up the divine barrier? Radiant were the blooms of peach blossoms in the Peach of Immortality Garden, and glorious were the rosy-tinted clouds. The Jade Emperor sat upright in the pavilion. This immortal lord, being most discerning of the situation, walked over and fell to my knees with a thud. This offending immortal, Song Yao, pays his respect to the Jade Emperor. You sure are candid when it comes to confessing, the Jade Emperor said, his tone unhurried. I lowered my head. This offending immortal has repeatedly violated the rules of heaven while in the mortal world. I'm aware that there is no hiding the fact from the Jade Emperor's omniscient eyes, and so. The Jade Emperor cut me off mid-sentence. Forget it. Do you think you can pull the wool over my eyes by being so long-winded and writing a memorial? I have already shown your confession memorial to Hengwen Qingjun, and he has told me everything. Alarmed, I jerked my head up. The Jade Emperor smacked his palm on the stone table with an icy expression. Song Yao, look at what you did in the mortal world. My mind was in turmoil as I quickly explained to the Jade Emperor, Jade Emperor, this is all this offending immortal's fault. You must not listen to the words of Heng Wen Qing Jun. Qing Jun was under my. The Jade Emperor jolted abruptly to his feet, flung his sleeves heavily, and said with a grim laugh, I naturally know the fault is yours. There is no pushing the blame onto someone else even if you want to. You get yourself tied up with Tianchu and now you get Heng Wen Qing Jun involved too. Song Yao, oh, Song Yao. I sent you down to the mortal world, and you reaped yourself quite the bountiful harvest. I kept silent, and the Jade Emperor continued, you were a variable to begin with. No one could have expected you to ascend to the heavenly court that day. I went along with the will of heaven and let you remain in the heavenly court. Sure enough, more complications have arisen with this trip of yours to the mortal world. I prostrated over the ground. To begin with, this offending immortal became an immortal through no effort of my own. Tianchu Xingjun was right that day in Ling Xiao Palace when he said that I was still sentimentally attached to affairs of the mortal world despite my immortality. Heng Wen Qingjun, he, is ignorant of the ways of the secular world. In truth, I have lusted after him for a very long time. In making use of the opportunity accorded to me on this time around, I tantalized and seduced him. Qingjun, he is actually. This offending immortal knows my sins are unpardonable. Whether I am to be sent to the immortal execution terrace or totally obliterated, I deserve it. The Jade Emperor did not speak again. Following the trail of the cool breeze, a pair of bees flew into the pavilion and chased after each other right before this immortal lord's eyes. With his hands behind his back, the Jade Emperor stood by the steps of the wayside pavilion, and the pair of bees, chasing after one another, flew over to his side. The Dao is, of itself, natural, attained by following one's heart, coming all together in one harmonious whole, the Jade Emperor said. The heavenly court is not like the Western paradise of Buddha, where one has to be without passion and love, desires and demands. However, the karmic cycle of cause and effect holds true for all living creatures in heaven and earth. Immortals might go along with the flow, but they cannot escape reaping what they sow. The rules of the heavenly court are, in truth, meant to rectify one's conduct. Case in point, Nanming and Tianchu. The Jade Emperor strolled back to the stone table and sat down. Nanming has long developed feelings for Tianchu, yet he was harsh and merciless when he was putting Qingtong En's Hylan on trial with Tathagata Buddha and me. He was already lacking integrity, and yet he was so severe in his treatment of others. If we disregard other karmic causes and effects, it was for this very reason that he and Tianchu must undergo trials and tribulations after their banishment. This immortal lord suspected that the Jade Emperor's fury was scrambling his senses. No matter how I listened to these few words of his, they were not at all relevant to the topic at hand. Perhaps the Jade Emperor simply wanted to spout some high-sounding words, which was fine by me. There is love in the mortal world, as there is in heaven. But even in the mortal world, homosexuality was the exception, let alone in the heavenly court. This was the reason the Jade Emperor was omitting by disregarding the other causes and effects. I heard the Jade Emperor asked me, Song Yao, do you know what is the gravest of all sins you have committed this time? This offending immortal knows, I answered immediately. This offending immortal harbored the intent to seduce Heng Wen Qingjun with mortal desires, and this sin is unpardonable. The Jade Emperor rose to his feet again and walked along the wayside pavilion. After a moment, he said, Go to Minga Xingjun. Let him inform you of the cause and effect. I looked up, uncertain, but the Jade Emperor had already made his way down the wayside pavilion. Several heavenly envoys instantly emerged from the peach blossom woods, and followed the Jade Emperor out of the Peach of Immortality garden. There were no 70 or 80 heavenly soldiers popping out of the peach blossom woods to detain me after the Jade Emperor left. The Peach of Immortality garden was silent all around. I could not sense even half a wisp of other immortals' breath. But come to think of it, the entire heavenly court was abounded with immortals, and the heavenly court was tightly and securely guarded all around. The Jade Emperor did not have to worry about me absconding. Besides, I wanted to know what the so-called cause and effect he referred to were. I took a slow stroll in the Peach of Immortality garden, thinking about every potential seed of cause before my ascension that would go on to bear the fruit of effect in the heavenly court. I ruminated it over, but I could not figure it out. Exiting the Peach of Immortality garden from the gate on the other side and walking along a narrow path would lead me to the back door of Minga Xingjun's Tianming Manor. I walked over to the door. Not far from this door was the lotus pond where I first met Heng Wen. The sight of it under such circumstances utterly devastated my little heart. The clear breeze swept past, and in my daze, I heard Heng Wen calling out to me, "Song Yao, Song Yao." I felt more and more melancholy. Heng Wen's voice asked right in my ears, "The Jade Emperor ordered you to head over to Minga Xingjun's residence, so why are you standing motionlessly before the door like a pole?" I sighed. I saw the lotus pond and could not help but stop for a look. I realized something amiss the moment the words were out of my mouth, and whipped my head back. Heng Wen was standing right behind me. I fixed my eyes on him and reached out to touch him. He was real. "Why do you look so panic-stricken?" Heng Wen asked. "I thought you were being held in custody by the Jade Emperor," I answered honestly, "so I was a tad startled when I saw you." Tapping his folding fan, Heng Wen said, "Hasn't Song Yao Yuan Jun righteously shouldered all the sins committed? So how could the Jade Emperor still hold me in custody?" He raised the tips of his eyebrows and continued, "Since you are dawdling here instead of heading over to Minga Xingjun's residence, I wonder if you have the time to sit with me by the pond and listen to me preach about cause and effect." Heng Wen's tone was extremely unfriendly. I went along. Sure, I was about to say something else, but Heng Wen was already striding vigorous steps toward the lotus pond. I could only catch up with him. The huge rock from back then where Heng Wen had laid out the paper to draw the lotuses was still there. Heng Wen found a spot to sit without thinking, while I hesitated a little, unsure if I should sit closer or further away. Eventually, I compromised at a spot I gauged to be neither far nor near. "This lord can't be bothered to speak in a loud voice," Heng Wen said, "so come closer a little." I shifted about 3 centimeters closer to him. Heng Wen frowned. "Closer." I shifted another 3 centimeters. Heng Wen quipped, "Either you head over to Pixiang Palace now and borrow a set of skirts from any of the celestial maidens, upon which you can continue hemming and hawing accordingly, or you come closer still." I moved so close, I was at Heng Wen's shoulder, which finally satisfied him. I gazed at the lotus pond and said in a soft voice, "Heng Wen." "Actually, Heng Wen reached out with his folding fan to cut me off. "Since it is so hard for you to speak, don't expend your effort by continuing. Let's leave you aside for the time being. Tianchu has already reverted to his regular self, and at present, he is like a walking corpse being detained in Yaoguang Palace. Let me first share an old story from the past with you." Even the tips of Heng Wen's hair were emanating a chill. Not daring to defy him, I pricked up my ears and listened. Of Tianchu Xingjun and Nanming Dijun, Heng Wen began, one was the star of emperors, and the other was in charge of a nation's fortunes and destiny. From birth, they were destined to complement and support each other, to be inextricably connected to one another. After hundreds of years of entanglement, a thread of immortal bond finally formed between the two lords. When the thread of immortal bond first came into being, it was merely just a slip knot on each lord's fingers. In the heavenly court, if this thread of immortal bond was formed between two immortals, they must descend to the mortal world to undergo tribulations. This sort of thread was originally formed between a male and a female immortal, since the fusion of pure yang immortal energy and pure yin immortal energy was the natural way of heaven. Perhaps it occurred in this case because Tianchu and Nanming were too intimately involved with one another, resulting in a thread being unexpectedly formed between them. For that reason, the Jade Emperor sent them to the mortal realm to experience the world's tribulations. Whether the thread of a mortal bond is severed or tightened into a dead knot after these calamities is all left to heaven's will. So it turned out that Tianchu and Nanming had already underwent tribulations in the mortal world once before. Since there was such a deep, grounded connection to one another, why did the Jade Emperor send me to break up the lovebirds? Heng Wen continued. Not long after Tianchu Xingjun and Nanming Dijun reincarnated into the mortal world, their thread of a mortal bond broke. Tianchu's reincarnation in that life was more or less similar to the Mu Ruian of this life. He was the descendant of a family of officials then too, and he was weak and frail by nature. Nanming was the young master of a military family. He grew up with Tianchu, and they were even fellow classmates. The immortals all guessed that Tianchu and Nanming's thread was certain to be unbreakable, that it would turn into a dead knot, but no one could have expected. Heng Wen paused for a moment before continuing. No one expected a mortal to barge in between them and break the thread of a mortal bond. The thread that was supposed to tether him to Nanming ended up being forcibly bound to that mortal instead. Hey? Which fellow in the mortal world had this much might? To think he was able to pull the divine thread off Nanming's hand and secure it to his own finger. Heng Wen proceeded, that mortal was also a classmate of Tianchu, and he had been considerate and attentive to Tianchu when he was 11 or 12 years of age. There was even a time he protected him during a misunderstanding between Nanming and Tianchu, and it was from then on that the thread was severed. At first, the other end of the thread was merely stuck to that mortal's hand, but he showed such care and consideration to Tianchu in every way possible, and the two of them were together all day long from childhood well into their adulthood, reciting poems in the breeze and joining their beds to converse through the night. And so, the thread went from merely sticking to that mortal's hand to being bound. Initially, it was a slipknot, but the tribulation Tianchu was destined to undergo in that life was the same as Mu Rui in the execution of his entire clan and the confiscation of his family's properties. Tianchu was supposed to return to the heavenly court at that time, but no one expected the mortal to actually go against heaven's will and save Tianchu. He settled down with him in a small courtyard, as inseparable as can be. Left with no other alternative, Minga Xingjun could only make Tianchu gravely ill. That mortal remained by Tianchu's bed, devoting himself to taking meticulous care of him. The day Tianchu finally returned to the heavenly court, the slip knot on that mortal's knot had already become a dead knot. The jade pendant that Tianchu has on him was a gift from that mortal, and even after thousands of years, he still carries it with him. So it turned out that such a story existed in Tianchu's past, one that left listeners sighing helplessly, including me, in that moment. Heng Wen turned his head aside to look at me, and I marveled, truly a moving past. Don't you find this past familiar after listening to it? Heng Wen asked, tone icy. Familiar? Why would he suddenly use this of all words to describe it? Heng Wen let out a scornful laugh. Look into the lotus pond. With a flick of his sleeve, the lotus flowers and leaves in the pond parted to reveal an unbroken expanse of water. A sudden silver light spread until the surface was a mirror. A scene appeared in this looking glass. In the mirror, there was a hall lined with short tables and chairs. A portrait of Confucius hung in the background of what was apparently a private school. Two children stood face to face with one another, their hands clearly connected by a golden thread. Of these two, one had delicate features, and the face of the other was fierce. These must be the young Tianchu and Nanming. No matter how I looked, I could not but feel familiar with this scene. Standing between these two children was another child whom I found intelligent and lovable at first sight. This child was standing before Tianchu, shielding him with his chest puffed out. I felt that I recognized him, but could not place him. Looking utterly furious, Nanming bellowed, "This is none of your business. Step aside if you know what's good for you." That child, little big man that he was, retorted, "Do you have the capability to make me step aside? I'm telling you, he's under my protection from now on. Don't even dream of bullying him if you can't get past me." Nanming stood, glowering, before resentfully turning his back. As he left, he slammed the table, and the golden thread on his hand slipped off and made contact with the edge of the table. That child, on the other hand, turned around to pat Tianchu on the shoulder. "Don't you worry. No one will dare to bully you when there's me, Song Yao, to have your back in this private school." I gaped, dumbfounded and thunderstruck. The child in the mirror tugged at Tianchu and pulled him outside. "Let's go out and play." His hand unwittingly pressed down on the tabletop from earlier, and that golden thread stuck to his hand, shining brightly as it connected him and Tianchu. Heng Wen grabbed my left hand and flicked his finger. Wrapped around the root of my little finger was a piece of dazzling golden thread, and there, at the end, was a dead knot. How could this be? The child in the mirror was all grins as he tugged at Tianchu in the courtyard and said, "Du Wanming, you have to do a better job with my homework today." Du Wanming. I suddenly recalled the name. Stars swam before my eyes. Tianchu actually was Du Wanming. That, Du Wanming. But how could Du Wanming and I have had an illicit, homosexual love affair in the mortal world? Clearly what? The thread is already tethered to your hand. Heng Wen said, with a smile that was not a smile. I grasped him by his shoulders, not knowing if I should slam my head against the ground or pound my chest and stamp my foot. Oh, heaven and deities above, this is a gross injustice. End chapter.